So, welcome to the August 25th, 2022 electronic meeting of the Environmental Commission. This meeting is in accordance with executive orders from the governor to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, of which there are two, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end, please call 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 915-8343-9176. Again, the phone numbers are 877-853-5247 and 888-788-0099. And the meeting ID is number 915-8343-9176. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. All right. So, Galen, would you read the land heritage statement?
Sure. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands like almost all property in the United States on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals. And that's the land heritage statement.
Thank you, Galen. Do you want to move on to the roll call?
Sure. Okay, Commissioner Needham. Commissioner Needham. Councilmember Dish.
Present.
All right. Commissioner Graham. Commissioner Graham. Councilmember Griswold. Councilmember Griswold. Commissioner Collywart.
Here.
Chairperson Brown.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Mursky.
Present, participating from my home in Ann Arbor.
Okay. Vice Chairperson Mitchell.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Vandenbroek. Commissioner Vandenbroek. Commissioner Oriole. Commissioner
Here in
Oriole.
Ann Arbor.
Okay. Commissioner Gibb Randall.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Martian. Commissioner Marson. Commissioner Gruber.
Here in Ann Arbor.
All right. Commissioner Niedrich.
Here in Ann Arbor.
All right. We have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, Galen. So the next item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. So is there a motion to approve the agenda as written? Shannon?
Second.
Seconded by John Mursky. Is there any discussion? Raise your hand or speak up. No suggested additions or modifications. So whoever approves the agenda as submitted, raise your hand or say aye. 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 Okay, it passes unanimously. I believe. Any no's? I don't think I saw anything. So no abstentions either. So the agenda is approved as submitted. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the July 28th meeting. Is there a motion to consider the minutes?
I move the minutes be approved as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Shannon seconds. All who approve of the minutes of July 8th, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any, nope. Okay, they passed unanimously. So moving right along here, this brings us to public commentary. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak up for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 915-8343-9176. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will then hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sound so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And be patient, there is a delay of up to 30 seconds before a connection might be established. So Galen, is there anybody on the line right now?
Right now, there is no one.
Okay, let's wait 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anybody on the line yet, Galen?
There's no one on the line.
Okay, then this ends the first public comment period. There's a second one later on in the meeting around 8:30. So there's no special presentations. There's no unfinished business. So the next item on the agenda is new business. So this is going to be a bit different. As you all know, there was a contamination of the Huron River by chromium-6 on July 29th, I believe. It was reported to EGLA on August 2nd, I think. And EGLA started a testing program on the 2nd and the 4th. And we've been lucky. I looked into it quite a bit. I asked city staff if they wanted to come and do a presentation about it, but they declined. And subsequently now you see that if you look at the Huron, the best information I've seen is with the Huron River Watershed Council or with the Washtenaw County Health, Health Department. Because MDHHS and EGLA are the primary government regulators that are supposed to respond quickly to this sort of thing. So, as I'm sure you all know, there was, instead of some 8,000 pounds of chromium-6 that released into the river, we only got something like 40 pounds. So a much lower number. I'm sure that's just a rough estimate. Anyway, and so if anybody has any questions, we can talk about that. But I thought, given that event, that what I would do is just have an open discussion among all us on various water quality issues. Because as you know, we've been a little bit quiet since we did the storm on water quality issues since we looked at the stormwater, special stormwater management district overlay about a year ago. And we have some new commissioners now that are forming a nucleus of the new water quality working group. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to just have a discussion among ourselves about what the challenges and threats are overall for the city's water quality, both coming in and going out, and see what we and see what how we all feel about these various threats and what kind of prioritization we might wish to bring to all these issues. So I think that'll help us get centered and oriented towards making a contribution to the community and city council on these sorts of topics. So I just drew up, the small presentation that I drew up and posted on Legistar and that Galen distributed yesterday. Is just basically a guide for discussion, just to try to structure it a little bit. So we're not wandering all over the place. So I will try to moderate this discussion. And so if you'd like to chip in, please raise your hand at any time. But before I do that, I looked into the Chromium-6 issue, and I attended the rally that was held outdoors up in Milford, which was attended by Yusuf Rabi, the chairman of the Oakland County Commission. Kathy Griswold was there. A number of other people from the local, from the statewide environmental community, environmental NGOs. And, it was, as you all know, there was also some potential criminal liability because there was an alarm that went off, and 460 times, and it was just turned off. And this happened after hours by an employee that wasn't supposed to be there, who resigned the next Monday. So I checked in with Jeff Irwin and Yusuf Rabi about this, and they both told me that in this circumstance, the investigative authority is with EGLA. And it's the Attorney General that has the prosecutorial authority. So I think over the next few months, we'll see what transpires here. But I think it just outlines, since we're the major community downstream of Wixom and this Tri-Bar plant, I think we all need to pursue this as diligently as we can and make sure that this just doesn't happen again. Because as you know, it was the same corporation that contaminated the Huron River with PFAS for many years. And this basically happened because they have an existing industrial pretreatment permit to run all their waste that's pretreated for hazardous substances, supposedly before it goes into the Wixom Municipal Wastewater Treatment Plant. But the PFOS compounds and PFOA compounds are still not listed as hazardous waste. And so for that reason, that they don't necessarily declare that they're releasing them. Because I think these can only be, my understanding of the law, and please contradict me if I'm wrong, is that they're only required to list what official EPA identified and defined hazardous substances are. That's all they're required to report to the government. What the government says is toxic. And so this is a major, of course, loophole within our the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act. So this kind of thing needs to be. This is one of these things that needs to be addressed at the federal level, because that's where the original authority comes from. And my understanding is that Michigan State has laws that Michigan State is not allowed to regulate anything, regulate anything more stringently than what the federal government regulates. So the state of Michigan was somewhat hampered there until this provided them the authority. The fact that the EPA wasn't regulating them as hazardous substances allowed the Michigan state government to do that. So here we are, and I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion during the coming year. But I will share my screen. I think, Galen, can I get permission to share my screen? Okay, here we go.
Do you see the green box at the bottom?
Yeah, I do. Hang on a second.
Recording in progress.
Oh, here we go. So I got it.
Okay.
I just still had it in my, in my icon bar. So can everybody see this? Okay. So yeah, just raise your hand if you want to step in here, and I'll work the slide deck. So in the general category of improving water quality in the Ann Arbor region, there's 4 separate categories you can think of. There's the drinking water, there's our stormwater that's released into the Huron River, and the groundwater, where we have several contamination plumes. We have the Gelman 1,4-dioxane plume, and we also have various plumes of trichloroethylene, for example, coming from some legacy dry cleaning establishments here in the city. And then we also have, of course, we release compounds into the Huron River through our wastewater treatment, and the water is separated out from the solids, and the solids are they used to be called sewage sludge, but a number of years ago, various people wanted to have a prettier term for it, so they call them biosolids now, not sewage sludge. And so those biosolids are spread on fields. And Ann Arbor's biosolids are, City of Ann Arbor contracts with various companies over the years to spread the biosolids from our wastewater treatment plant onto agricultural fields nearby. So that's a matter of public record that's kept by the state. So I have some of that data that I've collected. So I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested in the commission, or principally through the through the water quality working group. And as we can just look over the data and the information and see what we might make of it, and what we want to bring to the full commission in the near future, during the coming year. So so let's just address drinking water first. So there, as you know, we got 85% or so of our drinking water comes from the Huron River. The water intake is in Barton Pond, upstream of the dam, and we get about another 15% of our standard capacity from various wells, that are around, that are placed around western Ann Arbor and in Sire Township, I believe. So what are the different threats to this water quality? First of all, there's industrial and commercial sources. These are what are normally called point sources. And these are the ones that the government regulates, point sources, particularly through the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. So we have that Tri-Bar plant. There are actually 4 chrome plating plants owned by Tri-Bar that are up in Wixom. And so they've released PFAS in the river, and they released chromium-6 just recently. They reported that. But it's always difficult to say what else they may have released, which is actually toxic, but has never been defined as a toxic substance by the government. So so this is an ongoing problem that's going to happen until we can reform some of the federal laws. Or perhaps if we can find the room in the state, if the federal government is not stepping up, then we can petition the state government and try to get our elected representatives, try to get the state government to try to address some of these toxins, as happened with PFAS. And just for a rough overview, the PFAS contamination was not discovered until it was added by the EPA to what's called the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, which is a modification of EPA's authority so that EPA can test for various substances that are not regulated currently, that they think might be released prominently and might be health hazards throughout the United States. And so part of the UCMR3. The samples were collected in 2014, and EPA reported the data in 2015. And that's when Ann Arbor's drinking water plant was one of the testing sites for UCMR3. And that's when the PFOS contamination and other PFAS compounds were discovered to exist in our drinking water. So the city of Ann Arbor reacted as promptly as they could and initiated, and IGLA, I believe, initiated actions to try to figure out what the source was way back in 2015 or 2016. And this was all before the MPART, the state MPART program was started. So I'm not sure exactly when the city began to install granular activated carbon beds, charcoal beds, basically to absorb the PFOS that was coming in. And I'm not exactly sure when Tribar stopped releasing PFOS to the river. But again, there's a fish advisory because PFOS will bioaccumulate up to 1,000 times higher concentrations in body tissues, 1,000 times more concentrated than it is in the water that they're swimming in. So even though the PFOS concentrations in the water were roughly equivalent to what the existing EPA health level advisory was, those numbers dropped dramatically, and they've dropped dramatically since then. The EPA last June dropped them down to sub parts per trillion for PFOS and PFOA. These are the legacy long-chain PFAS compounds that bioaccumulate. And so it may be another, and EGLA continues to test the fish every year. They collect the fish samples and store them, and then they're analyzed by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services over the winter, and usually around March 1st is when they update the fish advisors statewide. And so that's when the community, when you can see what's changed in terms of the fish advisories from the year before, around March 1st. So Sarah, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Hi. I'll just chime in. So I am involved. So I work for Eagle actually, and I've been involved in PFAS on the Huron. And I'm sorry that I missed the last meeting, Steve, where you talked about PFAS. But yeah, so like the PFAS in surface water in the Huron has dropped significantly since the remediation at Wixom. But we're still finding concentrations, above like what you should be eating in fish. So part of our ongoing studies is looking at PFAS as a source to fish and sediment. So we have ongoing research where we're actually looking at like food chain studies with sediments collected from like around the Huron River watershed. So I just wanted to provide a little update on that, but the state's still working on that. And hopefully that study will help inform if sediment remediation is needed within the watershed.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
And so with the chromium-6, I'll just mention in this context that chromium-6 means that it's a high oxidation state of chromium. And so it's the high oxidation state of the chromium makes it a very strong oxidizing agent, which is probably what makes it carcinogenic. However, various natural processes, when it's in the environment, either in water or soils, or in your body, will fairly rapidly, it converts because it's so reactive as an oxidizing agent. It will oxidize whatever, a lot of compounds that will come in contact with it. And so it's pretty quickly reduced from chromium-6 to chromium-3, which is not recognized as a toxic substance. It's in fact an essential nutrient that's involved in a lot of central metabolic processes in mammals, at least. And so that chromium-3, the EPA is recommends a surface water limit of 120 parts per billion and a drinking water limit of 100 parts per billion, but those are, that's for total chromium. Because of this fact that the chromium-6 reacts very quickly, it seems like the EPA has not really established, a drinking water criteria for chromium-6. They just specify one for total chromium. Because I think the assumption is that whatever chromium-6 might come in from the intake through the standard water treatment processes gets reduced to chromium-3. And so you just want to measure, you want to use an assay that measures all the chromium. If there's chromium-6, could be there for chromium-3. So, the way these things are regulated is these NPDES. I've forgotten what that stands for. But if somebody has a permit to release any substance from an industrial or commercial enterprise, they're supposed to have an NPDES permit, I believe. I'm sure Sarah knows more about this than I do. But again, there are, and Ann Arbor, the city of Ann Arbor has NPDES permits as well. And the University of Michigan, for example, has a permit to run its waste through the Ann Arbor Wastewater Treatment Plant, and there are various other enterprises within the city here that have their individual NPDES permits, and of course, the wastewater treatment plant itself has an NPDES permit. So some of that data can be found on the internet. And the question there is what is, it's hard to tell what other non-NPDES sources may exist. As for example, it's come to the attention through various NGOs nationally that have done some testing that that actually car washes use PFAS compounds. And so, it's probably in the extra special deluxe, detailing treatment that you get where you can make your tires look like new. So they're probably spraying something like, this is just a supposition, speculation on my part, but it's something like that, like they're spraying some product onto your car, probably on the tires, and it contains PFAS. But it's hard to tell which PFAS compounds there are that are being used for that purpose. But I think a lot of car washes recycle their wastewater. My understanding is that some of them do, but I'm not exactly sure where all that goes. Whether now it goes into the sanitary sewer, or whether it goes into the groundwater, or maybe both, depending on the location. But this is ultimately going to present an issue where car washes are going to have to stop using PFAS, or they're going to have to probably acquire an NPDES permit if they choose to use PFAS or other chemicals. So the testing programs are pretty minimal. That's why I personally am a big fan of citizen testing, because prices have come down quite a bit. Like, for example, you can get a reasonable PFAS measurement of drinking water for $80 by mail order. And so I've used it for the water coming out of my faucet, both here and a few other homes. And the results I get compare to what the city posts on its website. So the $80 test is not an EPA approved as yet test, so it's not legally defensible. But it's a very simple test that anybody can use. And you can order it from a company called Cyclopure that's in Illinois. So another major source is agricultural. So of course, pesticides and nutrients are the major pollution sources. So the Huron River Watershed Council has had a great program that Rick Lawson over at the Huron River Watershed Council has done outreach to various agricultural enterprises upstream of us. They're all upstream of us in the Huron River. They're mostly in the Arms and Boyden Creek and Mill Creek, which is around Dexter, and Davis Creek and Portage Creek. So those percentage numbers on the slide just reflect the amount of land in these drainages that go into the Huron River, which are devoted to agriculture. And of course, most of it is corn and soybeans because of the Farm Bill subsidies and as commodities. And so, a lot of farmers use quite a lot of pesticides for corn and for soybeans. And there's some information that we can look, that anybody can look at on the Huron River Watershed Council website about that study and about what the results were. So Rita, you have your hand up.
Actually, that's all I needed to know is the information on what's found in the testing. So
Okay.
I'll look it up. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. And pesticides, of course, because if they're growing corn and soybeans, both of those plants have been bred over a decade ago to be resistant to glyphosate or Roundup. So they use many farmers use enormous amounts of Roundup, to raise these crops, these commodity crops, corn and soybeans. So so much Roundup has been used, of course, that there are native plants that have taken up that gene and that have resistance to glyphosate. Some very very invasive ones as well. So it looks like this practice may be ending soon, just because there's a lot of invasive native plants that are glyphosate resistant. So they'll move on to some other pesticide, but of course, the classic ones like dieldrin and other things that we use on these commodity crops contaminate most drinking water nationwide, and they do have cumulative health effects. But the Huron River Watershed Council has been doing a pretty good job at testing for these things within the watershed, and they've reached out to farmers to try to get them to manage the nutrient releases to the river, which besides the pesticides, of course, the nutrient pollution we're mostly talking about phosphate here and nitrogen. Well, the focus is usually on phosphate because phosphate encourages harmful algal blooms in stagnant waters. So this is contributing to the harmful algal blooms that appear in the summer downstream of us in the Huron River at Ford Lake and Belleville Lakes. Because behind those dams, the water is not flowing. It gets anoxic in the summer, and you get harmful algal blooms, which create toxins. Which, in fact, it's a big problem in Western Lake Erie, and the city of Toledo had to shut down its drinking water system for a week a number of years ago, and because of the global warming that we experienced through the climate crisis, this is becoming a much more serious problem. Also because there are more agricultural operations like CAFOs, especially they're allowed to spread their manure. Manure from animal farms is generally pesticide free compared to composts and biosolids. But the nutrients are at a very high level, phosphorus and nitrogen. So those contribute to the pollution within the state, especially when they're spread on frozen or snow-covered ground in the winter, because the state allows that. And this has been a major point of contention for most of the NGO community in the state here, is trying to prevent farmers from spraying their manure on frozen agricultural land because there's not a big enough buffer. There's not a big enough natural barrier between the agricultural fields and the river to try to absorb some of these nutrients before they run off the surface and enter the river. So another thing to consider here is a lot of the agricultural lands were reclaimed swamps. So they have tiles. There's a tile system that underlays the soil for agricultural fields, and those drains generally drain into a pipe that goes directly into a surface water ditch, and so that does not help them out at all either. So this just serves as a reminder that the city has signed a consent judgment that we discovered a year ago with the state. The state had sued the city of Ann Arbor and a few other permit holders for discharging too many nutrients into the river. So we're under consent judgment to try to reduce the nutrient pollution that comes out of wastewater treatment plants, and that's going to be a topic for discussion at a environmental commission meeting sometime within the next year. So another source to our drinking water is, so Sarah, you raised your hand again.
Yeah, I just thought I'd circle back on the pesticides. So the state right now is working on creating water quality standards for a class of pesticides known as neonicotinoids. So if you guys have heard of like the bee colony collapse disorder, neonicotinoids are the type of pesticide that led to that issue. And we're also finding that they're incredibly toxic to organisms living in rivers. So like mayflies, like EPT taxa, if you're familiar with that term. So yeah, the state's working on water quality standards for that class. So far they've passed for imidacloprid, which is the one that's most toxic of the 6. And then, yeah, there's plans for other pesticide projects in following years. So we do have a small program to help address some pesticide issues. And I have nothing to add for nutrients. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. What about chlorpyrifos?
No plans to study that. Is that more of a human health or an aquatic health issue?
Yeah, it's neurotoxic to children.
Neurotoxic.
Children. Rita, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Sarah, when you say some actions to be taken, could you describe those a little more?
I think that's
pesticides.
Right. Yeah. So we so for the neonicotinoids, we conducted a sampling plan for the Saginaw River watershed. That was just completed last month. So we did monthly samples for all 6 neonicotinoids, comparing like monthly one-time sampling to a passive sampler. So a problem with monitoring for pesticides is that they're really flashy, right? So you get a rain event, you get this huge pulse. You know, if you sample at the wrong time, you miss it. So we were comparing different strategies for sampling for neonicotinoids, then also trying to understand if concentrations we're finding in the environment exceed, you know, what we know is toxic to aquatic life. So our results from that study showed that we were getting exceedances of chronic values. So that means long-term exposure for like 30 days to that concentration could cause, you know, a crash in the population of mayflies and chironomids. So it wasn't good news. And yeah, there'll be more to come.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
So the third category would be residential, because you know, and this mostly, of course, comes through consumer goods and what nutrients we're sending down the drain. So you know, like through garbage disposals, you know, not just toilets, but garbage disposals, sinks, kitchen sinks. And so this is where a lot of the PFAS contamination comes from, because you know, it's been the legacy PFAS compounds like PFOS and PFOA, especially, they've been circulating in the food supply for decades. So estimates are still that, you know, on average worldwide, basically 70% of your exposure to PFAS comes through food or cosmetics. 5% roughly comes through dust, you know, through household dust, you know, through carpets and draperies and other things, clothing that's coated with PFAS. Then, of course, there's pesticide residues as well. So, and the reason I started with drinking water is because, of course, most of the regulation in here in the United States, of course, is focused on threats to human health, much more so than threats to ecological health. So drinking water, the regulations for drinking water tend to be stricter and be taken more seriously than with other with toxicities to the ecological community and wildlife. So the next category would be stormwater. So what are the threats from stormwater? Most of them come through impervious surfaces. So the city owns a lot of impervious surface with their roads and sidewalks. Every homeowner, has a roof. Every building has a roof. Every building, people have driveways. So because the stormwater is running off an impervious surface directly through the storm sewer into the Huron River, it washes a lot of nutrients and pollutants into the river along with it, because they don't have the opportunity to be absorbed in the through the soil, through the natural soil. And in fact, I was shocked to hear this because I'd always assumed that lawns, grass is pervious, but it turns out that compared to like a forest floor, grass is only about 50% impervious. So, even if you have a good lush lawn, a lot of the rain that falls on your grass, about half of it's going to run off onto the sidewalk and into the street. No matter how soft the soil is underneath. Compared to a well-mulched garden or a native native planting. So a major problem is road salt, and it's mostly the chloride rather than the sodium or potassium. So, Sarah, did you want to mention something about this?
Yeah, sure. Chloride really became a huge issue with some pretty recent research showing that it can be quite toxic to freshwater mussels. So in 2018, water quality standards for the state of Michigan were established. Since then, there's been a lot of work trying to understand, well, how do we actually implement these standards and get chloride levels down when road salt obviously is so necessary for our safety in the winter. So there are some states that have these, they're like smart salting programs to help, municipalities and public works offices, learn different strategies for using less salt with still the same safety standards and things like that. So that's exciting, and hopefully something like that can happen in Michigan. Part of, I guess some work that I'm working on is I've been collaborating with Huron River Watershed Council. They provided me with a data set with chloride data for the entire watershed. So I'll be analyzing that to understand where the sources are coming from. And then with my work in the state of Michigan, I actually proposed a project for next year to focus specifically on the Huron River watershed to look at chlorides. So that would include, runoff from roads and collection by the adjacent river to see what the connection relationship is. And another issue is road brine. So using oil and mineral well brine to consolidate roads that aren't paved is a really common practice in Michigan. And those products not only have a lot of chloride, but they also have high metals and other contaminants in them. So we're also looking at a project to understand runoff from those types of roads as well. So that'll be coming in the next year, and hopefully I'll have time to present to this group on the findings of those research things.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. One of the things I've heard is that these brines are oftentimes they're like fracking, wastewater fluids from fracking. Do you know anything about that?
I'm not sure if we're allowed to use fracking. I know mineral well brine as well as oil gas field brine is allowed with certain restrictions. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm not on the fracking theme, so I can't speak to that.
Okay, well, that's something that I think we ought to look into. what practices are allowed and which are just not reported. Because I've heard, I'm not sure about Michigan, but I've heard that it's a big problem. In California, for example, because in some other states where fracking fluid, has been used as contaminated groundwater, but I heard that a lot of states are either not aware of it or don't really care about it about fracking fluid waste because it can be hazardous because of the chemicals that are used, but also you leach out a lot of radium and things like that. There are these substances called tenorm, TENNORM, which are toxic metals plus like radioactive radium. And so the states where fracking has been more prevalent, like Ohio, southeastern Ohio, Pennsylvania, they're not allowing you to inject or to bury these fracking fluids in landfills, hazardous waste landfills anymore. So the state of Michigan has been petitioned to get these fracking fluids from other states to have them disposed of here, because they're no longer allowed in these states where it's become there's much more public awareness about it. So that's something I think to look into as well. So then, of course, there's nutrients coming off the stormwater as well. And this is estimates I've seen. I don't know what the number is for Ann Arbor, but I've seen various studies that estimate that maybe half of the nutrients that went off in municipalities are coming from stormwater, and the other half come out of the wastewater treatment plant. So we should look into this in more detail during a commission meeting over the next year as we, address the consent judgment, because the city has to come up with a plan for reducing its releases of phosphorus to the Huron River within a year or two. So what other threats are there? There's of course petroleum products and coal tars. I mean, this was recognized. So the city of Ann Arbor has banned coal tar, spreading coal tar in your driveway to seal your driveway. Coal tar has been banned here. I'm not sure what the state's done about it, because I think it's still done in the more rural areas in town here. But the thing about coal tars is they don't, they're carcinogens, and but they're not very soluble in water usually. So they do migrate, but they'll migrate slowly off wherever they're applied. So I don't know if anybody knows more about that. Please raise your hand. Okay. Then of course there's miscellaneous chemicals like window washing fluids, yada yada yada. And then one of the things that's recognized as a growing health threat worldwide are micro and nanoplastics. The Huron River Watershed Council looked at microplastics, and they found it's coming from everywhere. There are no point sources of microplastics because academic studies on the West Coast, usually published by people on the West Coast, have indicated that about half of all the microplastics come from tire wear, from rubber tire wear, and that gets airborne, and so those microplastics are spread by the air, and then that's how they get into the groundwater and how they get into the Huron River. Because the Huron, somebody measured microplastics in various rivers in Ann Arbor and in the state of Michigan, and it was discovered that the Huron River had the highest levels of microplastics statewide. So, and I'm sure a lot of that comes from worn tires that have been spread around, but of course there's plastic bags and other plastics that deteriorate. And microplastics are defined as something less than, I think, 5 millimeters. So basically it's defined as being sort of out of sight, out of mind. It's plastic pollution that's macro that we see and we pick up that litter, but once it gets down to half a centimeter in size, roughly, nobody's going to pick it up anymore, so it becomes a microplastic, even though, it's not so micro. But all these plastics, these polymers, will eventually degrade down to nano sizes, where The size of the plastic particle is smaller than a cell in your body. And so what happens, of course, is that there's two things. First of all, these plastics will absorb and concentrate various toxins from the environment. You know, the water, a lot of pollutants are more attracted to binding to the plastics than they are to the water. So as water passes around these plastic particles, they will absorb and take up many pollutants such as PFAS and pesticides, endocrine disrupting chemicals, things like that. And so the major problem, of course, is you can drink them, you can get exposed to them. You know, there's an estimate that's spread around that we all have about a credit card size amount of plastic in our guts. It's still like a microplastic, so it's not absorbed into your body. But the major problem is once they become nanoplastics, they will get absorbed both through your gut and through your lungs. So there's an estimate that you can definitely measure. Losses in lung function in people, depending on how much nanoplastics they've been exposed to. As you inhale these particles, they stay in your lung, you know, just like smoke particles would if you're a smoker. And they gradually leach out these toxins, but they also, in themselves, they interfere with proper lung function. And so they're out there, they're getting smaller and smaller. So it's, even if we stopped, you know, making plastics and having them out in the environment, it's going to become an increasing problem worldwide as the existing plastic that's out there gets worn to smaller and smaller levels and becomes airborne. So, you know, this is a principal spur on people to try to ban plastic, to try to just stop, especially creating disposable plastics, and to try to stop, getting it out of the environment. Personally, I think it's hard to see where we're not going to be using plastic anymore because it is such a cheap, malleable construction material. You know, it's in dashboards of cars, it's in all of your household appliances. We all know how widespread plastic is in consumer products, you know, in our computers, our cell phones. So I don't think we're going to get rid of plastics, but this is where the circular economy is going to be especially important. If we can get plastics that are made that will degrade down to the molecular level, like the newer generation greener plastics, like polylactic acid, PLA, and there's other plastics that come from that are used from biological monomers, which degrade down to non-toxic natural products. So we can get plastics made through those materials instead of petroleum, or if we can handle the plastic waste more responsibly, that's another thing. That, you know, as I said before, you know, half of these plastics come from tire wear. So in my mind, this speaks to the need for, and it also comes from brake pads. You can definitely measure, brake pad particles coming from standard, disc brakes that are in the environment as a nanoplastic. So, this is something that's a distinct threat. It's a growing threat, even if we stop making plastics now and throw them out. And so we've got to really pay attention to this. So the third category was groundwater. So the threats to groundwater come through pervious surfaces. So it's the same compounds, but instead of washing down directly into the river through the stormwater, they'll get absorbed into the soil and into the groundwater, which, as I mentioned before, that's where a lot of the microplastics in the Mekong River come from, as far as what is known so far. So, what do we have here? We have the Gallman 1,4-dioxane plume. We have, of course, there's plumes from legacy dry cleaners and the various chlorinated solvents that are used, like tetrachloroethylene and trichloroethylene. And then there's of course, PFAS contaminations of compost and biosolids. So I'll expand on this a bit because, as you know, because PFAS have been circulating in the environment for a long time, they are in the biosolids, they're in the wastewaters, and they're in the compost. The city tested its compost in 2019, I believe, and we have measurable values of all the PFAS compounds, the some 47 that are tested standard through the standard high-level tests. 47 different PFAS compounds that are located that exist in part per billion levels in our municipal compost. I think our biosolids were tested, but I don't recall seeing that data. Also, they probably tested the wastewater effluent to try to see what PFAS compounds are coming out there, but those haven't been, they've probably been tested, but I haven't seen any reports. So I think that's something that the commission should look into as well, because regulations are going to be coming in the future that are going to make an impact on the city's budget. I mentioned this last month when I talked more about PFAS. So I won't go over this in any detail, but I think this should be a focus for what we're doing, is trying to do our community budget for PFAS and see what our existing levels are and what remediation technologies might be available. But of course, the only real solution is to just turn off the spigot and get the Debbie Dingell submitted a bill in Congress for the last 4 years called the Pfas Reduction Act. And so, of course, and it's in committee, and she's been very resourceful in trying to get it attached to the National Defense Authorization Act and other such bills that, have to be passed by Congress because they're budget bills, and the filibuster doesn't apply. And so, so I think I'm hoping that within as soon as possible that her intact PFAS Protection and Reduction Act will get passed, and so we will stop getting these toxic compounds released into the environment and into our consumer products and food supply. So just moving on to wastewaters and biosolids, it's the same story I mentioned before, that generally, it's from the point sources, if they have industrial pretreatment permits and go through a wastewater treatment plant, that's a potential problem for the city because it's getting a pass through, just like the wastewater treatment plant in Wixom got a pass through from the tri-bar industries that contaminated both their biosolids and their wastewaters. So their wastewaters ended up in the river and contaminated our drinking water. But the PFAS compounds also ended up in their biosolids. They were spread on agricultural fields. They were spread on farms. And there was a family farm in Heartland, if you recall, was contaminated. The gentleman was raising beef cattle, and he was donating the beef to various charity organizations and youth events, and he feels terrible about this. So I don't know what the state legislature is going to try to do about this, but this is a very common problem all over the United States, and so I think I think we should take on this responsibility of maybe looking at it in a disinterested manner and trying to collect information and evaluate it and try to see what remediation and update the residents here and city council about what regulations are coming down the pipe and what remediation technologies might be useful, and do a cost-benefit analysis for all of them. So, and then of course there's consumer goods. I'm not sure what the city can do about this. The city did pass a law when nutrient pollution was originally discovered to be a problem back in the 70s, and because the soils in Michigan are naturally fairly rich in phosphorus, the thinking was, well, you shouldn't have phosphorus in your detergents, because phosphorus was a common additive in dishwashing detergents and other consumer products. And so the city banned the use of phosphorus fertilizer, and also the use of it in selling here in the city. In this community, banned selling consumer products like dishwashing detergent that had added phosphorus to it, and they were successful in getting a lot of the local businesses to not do it. But my understanding is that anybody can walk into any of these box stores, and if you ask a clerk for the fertilizer that has phosphorus in it, they will sell it to you. They're just not allowed. They're not allowed to put it on the shelves, but anybody can walk up and ask somebody if they can buy it, and they keep it. They keep some in the back and say you're selling. So there's that as an example, but I'm not sure how far the city would go in trying to ban some of these other toxic substances like sunscreens, endocrine disruptors, because it's definitely going to damage the marketability of our municipal compost and our biosolids. Because the alternative to spreading our biosolids on agricultural fields is, well, you could spread it in forests or something like that, and maybe get away with that. But the alternative that's been done in New England is many New England states have banned the spreading the land application of any biosolid because of PFAS contamination. So the cost of the city it generally costs about 4 times as much to put these sewage sludges into a hazardous waste landfill versus, on natural land, which is a tragedy because, that soil amendments, biosolids and composts are about the best soil amendments you can have for growing anything. So this is definitely a threat to the city's bottom line, and there's also a regulatory threat as well. So I just summarized at the end here. I just listed some informational resources. I mean, I'd recommend to anybody to go and explore the Huron River Watershed Council. For those of you who may not be aware of this, I think it was created in 1965 or so, and it includes representatives from local governments such as Ann Arbor. Jen Lawson is a regular participant in the meetings. She's a city staff member. The county drain commissioner, Evan Pratt, attends these meetings as well. The state of Michigan, a lot of the regulations come through the county, through the drain commissioner or the water resources manager. I think they changed the title from drain commissioner to water resources manager, but Evan Pratt is the current person who holds that office in Washtenaw County. And so a lot of the basic regulations and monitoring is done through the county water resources commissioner, formerly called the drain commissioner. And then there's a local organization of governments called SEMCOG, the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. And so if you look at this website, you'll see what they have on water. And then Eagle, of course, has a couple of websites. There's MI Waters, is where you can find a lot of data. So I put here the site Map Explorer. This is where you can find information about NPDES permits and wastewater treatment plant IPP permits. So you see those are all under the water resources file system structure on the MI Waters website. So that's a good place to look for information. And then, of course, for PFAS only, there's the MPART website is very comprehensive. They talk about where contamination's been found, what their plans are, what sites are under investigation, and what the regulations are. That's where they talk about the PFAS fish advisories as well, and they point you to the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources webpage, which hosts all the fish advisories. And then on a bigger level, a higher level, I'm going from the local level up to the higher level. So there's another entity called the Great Lakes Commission that spends a lot of money. This is an international commission, so it includes all the states which border the Great Lakes, plus the provinces in Canada that border the Great Lakes. So this is a a larger regional organization that is tasked with regulating water quality in the Great Lakes. So, and then of course, at the highest level, we get the EPA. And so this is where you can find out information on the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, which are the major authorizations that Congress has given EPA to regulate water quality. So, so then the question is, well, what initiatives should we consider just around water quality? So we can consider a resolution to support HR 4314, which has been submitted every year by Yusuf Rabi, our local state representative. It's a bill that was drafted to re-empower Michigan polluter pay laws. Michigan used to have reasonable, really good polluter pay laws, but Governor Engler in 1995 neutered them completely. So, so this is a bill that's been sitting in the legislature. The current legislature does not, will not even let this come out of committee or hold public hearings on it or anything. So, because of, because of lobbying, intensive lobbying they get from the Chemistry Council and the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. So these are the major powers that are preventing polluter pay bill from getting passed by our state legislature. Then, of course, there's the Gelman 1,4-dioxane plume cleanup that we got involved with just last year in October, because this was all under a consent order that was sealed to the public. And so that seal was broken last October. And so the Environmental Commission had four sessions, public meetings on this. And so we issued a resolution to council recommending that the EPA consider it as a Superfund site, because this plume was discovered in 1984, and we can see how far the state's gotten in remediating and controlling the migration of this groundwater plume as it's advancing to the Huron River and through our Allen Drain as well. So, and then again, I mentioned earlier about, I don't know what we can do to ban PFAS in consumer products, but at the state level, we can ban the ban on bans, because Washtenaw County a number of years ago banned plastic bags, or they didn't actually ban them. They just put a 5-cent fee on them. And so within 24 hours or so, the Michigan Chamber of Commerce bent the ear of the state legislature, and so the state legislature passed a law which would ban any local bans categorically. So any local government entity is not allowed to ban anything that the state's not banning themselves. So this is another law that could be, if there's a change in the state legislature, this is another thing that could happen on the state level. So, and in terms of ordinance drafts, I'm not sure what ordinances the city could put into place to, to help protect the residents of the city. Absent any state action or federal action. But of course, we can always do exploration and public discussion. So one of the recent things that's happened is I had not been aware of this personally, but the Huron River Watershed Council has bi-monthly meetings, where they have, where, as I mentioned before, there's the county drain commissioner, various representatives from the governments that are within the Huron River drainage. There's a representative from EGLA there, from the water quality, working from the water quality group. And so I became aware of this bi-monthly meeting. And so I had a number of commissioners that are on the water quality working group are invited to attend that. So you should be on the email list. I think I am. I know Kathy Griswold is. Sarah, are you invited? Are you on the invitation list? Yes. And Bridget Gruber should be as well. So Bridget, are you on this list? Are you invited? I think the next meeting, the last meeting was held last week. And so the next meeting is in mid-October. So Bridget, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I am on that list.
Okay, good. So these are the commissioners that are invited to attend this meeting online. It's also in person as well, but you can also attend online. So we can begin. We've started attending this meeting, and so we can report back to the full commission, in a timely manner. And so then, of course, there's the city response to the lawsuit. So I'm not sure what role the commission should be playing here in terms of helping advise council and city staff on the consent judgment for the nutrient pollution. But this is coming up rather quickly because they're supposed to come up with a plan in April of 2023. I'm sure they're very active on it, but I think I'd like to invite them to come and talk about what their plans are. And then hopefully we'll have some information of our own to add to the discussion. And then another thing that's, of course, would impact the community is there's the stormwater utility lawsuit, which if there's a judgment made in court, it would be about a $13 million hit to the Ann Arbor's annual budget. Because this is basically the city has been using the stormwater millage, to pay for green infrastructure. And there's a lawyer in Southfield or Birmingham or somewhere that's, that's more or less an ambulance chaser that's going around looking for communities where they can get residents to add their names to the lawsuit. And so they've approached a number of communities in Southeast Michigan because they think they have a case that the city should not allow this kind of thing. So Lisa, you have your hand up.
I think that lawsuit is dead.
It keeps coming back from the dead. It has twice before. So I'm not sure how dead it is.
Last I heard.
Yeah. This happened last year, I think, where this law firm or this attorney found a resident in Ann Arbor who was willing to join the lawsuit as an affected party, because you can't sue if you're not a victim, a victim of the practice. So they had to find a city resident who would sign on to the lawsuit. So as far as I know, that kind of died again, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it's totally dead. I guess the city attorney should know that. But I know the regional NGO communities are concerned about this, so they're, So I'll go through my network and see what I can find out. So does anybody wish to add anything to this list or see what we might consider in terms of resolutions or drafting ordinances or topics that we could focus on over the coming year that would help the city, both the residents and the council members and city staff? I don't expect any answers right now, but John, you have your hand up.
I appreciate the perspective of Councilmember Dish in terms of what she and other council members think would be truly value add. We could write these 3 resolutions, pass them, and the question is, would they change anything? So I'd like to do something there's a return on our time invested. And so I'd like to hear the perspective of Councilmember Dish and others on the commission as to what really would have an impact.
No, I think we'd all like to feel we're all volunteers here, except for our city council members. But I would hope that we all. So what's our compensation? It's feeling like we're making a contribution. We're making an effective contribution to make life better here for everybody.
Well, for example, I'm not sure that let's just take the second bullet point under resolutions, that the Environmental Commission writing a resolution, spending a meeting, debating it, and passing a resolution is going to have any impact whatsoever on what happens with Gelman plume remediation and related activities. I'm not sure that taking action on the ban is going to also be meaningful in terms of really having any impact outside of maybe getting an article in MLive. And until maybe there is a change in the composition of the legislature, I'm not sure a resolution would be meaningful in terms of anything related to polluter pay laws. So all I'm saying is let's not, granted our time is free, but I think there's things that potentially have a greater return on our time invested than passing resolutions that will have no impact on what happens in terms of changing any of the dynamics on any three of these three topics. For example, I just appreciate other people's opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I share that concern. So I don't know. I think it's something worth considering. I'm not sure, you know, what value can we add? So Lisa, you have your hand up.
I mean, I don't want to, I think people should, if people feel that this is something they want to invest their time in, and these issues are important to them, I don't want to quash that. I can say that the Gelman plume cleanup is indeed ongoing, and there's nothing that council can do at this point to speed it up. It's ongoing on two tracks that are both out of our hands. One is a court track locally, and the other is the EPA. And there's really nothing that council can do to, you know, council has done everything to support both of those. So there, I don't know what role the Environmental Commission can play. In terms of the other two, the other two issues, I think those are on our legislative agenda, council's legislative agenda. So we have asked our lobbying firms to work on those at the state legislative level. And certainly every time Representative Robbie or Senator Irwin sponsor an environmental bill, the council typically passes a resolution in support of it. I think, as John Mursky has just stated, short of changing the composition of the state legislature, those bills aren't going to go anywhere no matter what resolutions the city council passes. So that would be the, you know, I think these would be symbolic, which is not necessarily bad. But you're talking about areas that are out of council's hands, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we could still provide a public forum for residents on a lot of these issues. You know, I think that's valuable. I mean, I've spent a lot of time researching all this stuff. That's why I've kind of monopolized the conversation, I think. But, you know, because this is a personal interest of mine.
If you want to do something more like an educational forum, I think that would be super interesting and probably more powerful than a resolution, because I don't know that the public closely follows the resolutions that are passed by this commission. But I think that my experience on the Planning Commission is that when there is a webinar hosted that addresses something that they're worried about, they get really into it. And so if we wanted to do some kind of a water webinar and talk about the activities that, you know, that our representatives are working on and our lobbyists are working on, and explain to them the importance of these, you know, it might get some people out knocking on doors for the November election. And we do have some close races, and that would be an incredibly excellent incentive, I think.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah. Yeah, we do have the power to schedule extraordinary public hearings, public meetings. Okay. John, you have your hand up.
Thank you. One area that I suggest we take up again is the water quality issue. I had an email exchange with Rita, I don't know, about a week ago on this topic. Some of us, not very many, Shannon for sure, will remember back in maybe early 2019, we had a presentation from the Watershed Council about water quality in the Ann Arbor area. As Steve mentioned, the Watershed Council site is really great. It evaluates the water quality of each creekshed and then major sections of the Huron River based on 13 different criteria, one of which is contaminants. So that ties directly to what we're talking about here. What we did is we took the data, the Watershed Council took the data at the time and evaluated the water quality in the city of Ann Arbor, looking at the relative size of each creekshed and the water quality for each creekshed, and then for the river, and then did a weighted averaging. And Rita, remind me, or Steve, somebody else might remember, I think Ann Arbor ended up at 30. It was 30 or in the mid to low 30s. The concern that I have is that, and maybe Bridget, this is something you can address, but it's something also the city should address. To my knowledge, that information is, first of all, not trend charted. So you can't see how it's changing over time. There are no SMART goals in terms of a target that is time bound or a series of stepwise targets to improve that. You can't find anywhere on the Ann Arbor website or the Watershed Council's website of anything other than snapshot values, and they're not time-based. So you can look at Allen Creekshed or the lower middle Huron River and see what the value is, but you don't know if the data was taken within the last year or if it's still using data for certain quality or certain parameters that may be 3 years old. So, I mean, I think that's something that we should take up. I looked up prior to the meeting some scores. So there is no calculation on the website for Ann Arbor. As I mentioned, in 2019 or so, it was, or maybe it was probably based on 2018 data, was in the 30s. Let's say I had written down, the upper Huron River is 61. The lower middle is 39, and the lower Huron River is 51. So if Ann Arbor and its creeksheds is in the low 30s, it's the worst of basically all those areas. And I think if we're serious about improving water quality, including a lot of the contamination issues that we talked about here, then it really makes sense that we have a SMART goal and metrics, and we trend chart it, and we define goals, and we get entities like the city and the Watershed Council and industries to get together to work on actions to improve our water quality. So that's something I think we could do and have an influence on that would be at least somewhat value add compared to, say, writing resolutions on something that is either ongoing or is unlikely to get any action at the state level. That's my 3 cents.
Okay. So are you saying, John, that we could get the data that Huron River Watershed Council has collected and try to do trend analyses and suggest some SMART goals?
Yeah, and maybe even ask the Watershed Council to set goals and to trend chart and to do a calculation for this city. I mean, all it is basically an update of anytime data changes. And like I said, I don't know how that is done. And then update that and trend chart it, whether it's, once a year or once every 2 years or once every X years, but at least see, is what's the overall quality of the watershed? What is the water quality of the creek sheds in Ann Arbor and around Ann Arbor? And what can we do to act on that? I mean, just one little thing, Shannon will remember this. Shannon and I made a proposal to put signage in Ann Arbor in various places along the Huron River where people frequent. Some other John's nodding his head, probably remembers that too. And just to raise public awareness and to indicate what the water quality is and motivate people to do something about it. And that proposal also went nowhere. So hopefully times have changed and composition of council has changed and things like that. And that might be something that this group could do, or at least influence.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. It turns out it was the county health department, for example, is responsible for putting up the fish advisory signage. And so in my capacity in the Sierra Club, we asked to help. We said we can recommend places to put them because where we've seen people fishing, and we volunteered to help put them out, but we were just kind of put off. We said, yeah, okay, that's a good idea, but nobody ever contacted us. So okay. But it's worth following up on. It's a good suggestion. Anybody else care to add anything at this point? Yeah, Sarah, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I actually am sort of thinking in line with John with the chloride project that I talked about earlier. To understand different sources within the city, and then with the idea that eventually we might have some outreach to parties that maybe are adding more chloride than they should to the watershed. So I kind of started with chloride because you got to start somewhere. But John, like if you have like the presentation that the Huron River Watershed Council gave, you could send that to me. I would review all that data, and you can prioritize based on what they said, maybe a little better than just picking chloride. So yeah, I would be really interested in that. That's all. Thanks.
I'd be happy to do that. It's still posted on Legistar, or I think I have a copy of it saved too on my hard drive. So I'll get it to you one way or the other.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, even if you know the date, I think a lot of these are posted on YouTube or something like that, so I can go back and watch it. Just 30 more seconds on the topic. Some of you have heard me say this before, so I apologize. But there's a cycle called the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And planning means setting a goal and defining actions, and then you do the actions, and then you monitor the results. And if the results are good, then you keep on doing those kinds of things. If they're not good, when you check them, then you adjust what your actions are, and then repeat that cycle. And if you're not measuring and you're not trending, then the whole continuous improvement cycle breaks down.
You're here. Rita, you have your hand up.
An area I've been thinking about is outside of pollution is flooding and risk for flooding that we might want to consider looking at. So I don't have anything prepared or thought through definitively, but I think it's something that we might want to consider.
Yeah, flooding. Yeah, I got a personal tour from Evan Pratt with Evan Pratt for a few hours last March, I think it was, where he showed me some of the basins of the cities. The city has some major, in terms of green infrastructure, the city's built some rather large basins. There's one down by the Bryant Community Center in Mallett's Creek. There was excavated, big excavation with a number of years ago to contain wastewater. There's also another one upstream in Mallett's Creek, upstream of that. And if you ever drive by, if you've been driving by Sire Church Road near Maple Road lately, you'll see this huge excavation project. down in the Lawton neighborhood. You know, it's down south of Cider Church Road. So this is a huge, excavation that's being made to create like a retention pond for stormwater to try to help alleviate flooding in the Lawton neighborhood. So the city has got projects going on, and I think we should have a meeting on that, and talk about that. And another thing, when I was traveling through New England, we spent a couple of nights in New Haven, and I was walking around the neighborhood, and I discovered the city of New Haven, for example, is putting in curb cuts with small retention ponds and natural plantings, between the sidewalk and the street. This is in an urban neighborhood where they're putting in these curb cuts, like maybe every other block. And so this has been something that I was intrigued with for years, that you could do this. And the city's tried this on Miller Avenue, going northwest out of town. Because Miller, as you recall, is a really long grade that's almost straight downhill, straight down the gradient. And so they've put in a few curb cuts in there, but it's harder for them to maintain these dispersed individual sites. Harder than having a big project where they put in a big hole in the ground and run in as much water as they can. A few big projects are more to their budget and to their liking than a lot of small projects, but this is something that we can see what other communities have been doing and what they're budgeting and how successful it's been. And we try to help city staff and city council, be updated about those efforts in other communities. What the parameters look like. Shannon, you have your hand up.
Yeah, the city has actually done a lot of that work. I've worked on some of them. And so there's actually more than I think you realize that's gone on around town. There were also there was one that the Huron River Watershed Council tried to do on the southeast side of town that was a total failure, where they kind of started putting things in and the neighbors really rebelled against it. So it's a tricky business in terms of what happens out in front of somebody's house. People kind of think of it as their own. And there's a lot of utilities and things like that in there. So the city actually has a green streets program where any new improvements that they do, they have certain standards that they use to try to make stormwater, managed in those areas more than they do, because right now a lot of the streets that are out there don't have any controls on them. So the city's actually done quite a bit in terms of green infrastructure in the ways that they can. It's not, not perfect, but they've actually been a pretty big leader in a lot of this too. So I don't, there's a lot of things around town as well. We don't have great soils for some of this stuff too, which makes it a little harder as well. But I would like to support what John was saying about being able to have some better data and for people to, I'm kind of maybe hopeful that some of our ideas that we said last time could possibly advance a little bit further. But one thing that has steadily increased, probably not even steadily, but exponentially increased, is the amount of people getting in the water in the Huron River. My office is right above the Cascades, and all summer long, we get to listen to people whooping and hollering and having a fantastic time going down the Cascades. People do it from Ann Arbor. People come from all over the area going to it. And additionally, there are a number of spots along the Huron River just upstream of there where people are just hanging out in the river on docks and swimming and things like that. And whether the city likes it or not, in terms of people putting their bodies in the water, they kind of don't officially say that they're swimming areas. People are using them as such. And so at the very least in those areas, even if we just want to sort of start small, to try to get some sense of, water quality in those areas. And like John was saying, we don't really know until it gets kind of tracked over time. Sarah, I'm thrilled that you are excited about crunching data. That's like music to my ears. because it feels like and I think it's tricky because, the city doesn't want to sort of alarm people at the same time. So it's a balancing act, I think, of not sort of freaking people out about things as well. But I feel like it's something that we can kind of do in our town. It feels like it lets people know what's going on, and also speaks to kind of larger patterns and issues that are going on out there at for many communities. So maybe this time around, if we can give that a try again, we'd have some better luck with it. And I know the composition of the water group has really shifted, and there's a lot of expertise on there too, which is very exciting. Again, the Huron River Watershed Council, I think, has shifted quite a bit too in terms of who is involved at that point. I don't know, that was probably a good 4 or 5 years ago, John. I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. But it feels like that just really, that area that is so intensely interactive between people and the Huron River feels like a zone that could be very rich for being able to have some sort of awareness and education, and could even extend into things like microplastics. Like, I know there's things that you can put in your washing machine that kind of help with that. Maybe they could sell them at the Argo, delivery. I mean, there may be ways to kind of extend out some of these other things on a smaller scale to be able to use that nexus of people and water interaction as a potential way for us to be able to have both education and raising awareness and things like that. So.
Well, thanks, Shannon. Does that, it sounds to me like it would be good to have a public hearing, at least one public hearing on the stormwater topic. And we can invite people in, like Evan Pratt is the drain commissioner, who's kind of in charge of that sort of thing, and people from the Huron River Watershed Council, and we should just talk about this, because this has been like a big goal for us for a year now, at least, trying to make the Huron River healthy enough to go swimming in,
Yeah.
And so let's see what we can do about that.
Yeah.
At least have public hearings and talk about, the benefits of the green infrastructure. And, because one of the things I heard from Evan is, the cities also did an experimental thing where they put pervious pavement down, but unfortunately it was where there's a bus turnaround. And so it took like a year for it to all get broken up.
Yeah, and then they sanded it by accident too, because it's very difficult to have one different place in the city in terms of all the processes and maintenance and things like that they have. So
sure.
They have really done a lot too. I don't want to give the impression that they've been negligent, because they really have done a lot of things for that as well. And it would be a way for them to kind of say what they've done, but also for us to be able to talk with them about, identifying what are next steps and what are areas that they haven't taken on that we might be able to assist with, because I think advocacy is something that we can do. And frankly, a big piece of it are people's own downspouts that are running onto their driveways and running straight down into the storm sewer. So there's a lot that the city's doing, but there's a lot that homeowners can do too. And so, that's a whole other dimension to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can develop an outreach activity as well, to neighbors and friends, family members here in town, and try to see if we can raise, I agree with Shannon, we could raise awareness in the community and try to see, how much, we can at least make people aware of, what they're about rain barrels and things like that. Because I know the city's done quite a lot of outreach efforts with that, but it's like everything else, you need to develop a sustainable momentum that might go on for years before you really, it's the kind of cultural change that sometimes takes generations.
Right.
But if anything we can do to accelerate that, I think both for this and for any of the other more progressive interests that a lot of residents support, like A20, like the whole A20 plan. I think there's quite a lot of support here among the residents, but there are gaps in knowledge and what people can do on their own. So I think we can help with those campaigns, I think. Okay. Well, I think we're running out of time here. So, John, you have your hand up, and then if anybody else wants to make a comment, please put your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to offer a few insights or observations about the Tri-Bar situation, if I may. So for context, for those that don't know me that well, I worked in industry my whole career. I worked for the German conglomerate Bosch. Among other things, it's the largest automotive supplier in the world. So I have some insights into the situation there. So first of all, Tri-Bar is clearly responsible for what it did, but the OEMs, in other words, the companies that buy their products, are also responsible. Tri-Bar makes mostly trim kinds of materials, and then they plate them. And a lot of that goes into automotive products, and the automotive companies obviously have a hand in approving the design of those products. And those products are designed with hexavalent chrome, with chromium-6 in the products. And as Steve pointed out, the hexavalent chrome was banned in Europe. I put that in, I think, in his email the other day. And I think it was banned in Europe in 2017. So just to put that in broader context, or a specific context, in the mid-90s, Bosch banned any new products with hexavalent chrome in the mid-90s. And Bosch didn't go belly up. The automotive industry in Europe didn't dissolve because you couldn't use that product. So it's really shared responsibility here in terms of regulation, in terms of the OEMs, and in terms of what Tri-Bar did. Another thing that I wanted to share is, and Steve knows this because I had Steve look at a draft of the email that I sent. You can get on the Tri-Bar website and use their contact us form. And I wrote an email to the CEO of Tri-Bar and admonished him for what the company did, and said it's basically a failure of leadership, and it's a failure of culture, and it's an indication that they have systemic problems, that they've had the kinds of issues that they've had with PFAS, and now this thing. And it doesn't take long for any one of us to get on their website and look up online and say, "Dear Mr. So-and-so," and write a 3-liner and put pressure on the company. But we should also, like I said, we should also be putting pressure on the OEMs, the customers, and also on the feds to do something about this. And let's see, I had something else written down, I think. No, that's it. So just wanted to share those insights.
And in that regard, the Ecology Center was circulating a petition to be sent to the major car companies, asking them to, please don't.
Yep, I've signed it, and everybody else should too.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's see. I'm going to stop the share here. So let's move on to the next item on the agenda, if that's okay. All right. Reports from committees. How about natural features? Anybody from natural features here? I know Chris isn't here. Okay.
I'm on the group. I think, Steve, I told you nothing has changed in the last month since you and I talked. We have not had a meeting on some of the ordinances that are being drafted related to landmark and heritage trees in probably 3 months. And we should really push Chris and me and others to really get this in front of the Environmental Commission. My concern is that we're trying, in this case, perfection is the enemy of the good. And having a perfect product doesn't really make sense anyhow, because this commission is likely to change, things in whatever the draft is, and that's likely to be changed again when it goes to the attorney's office and to city council. So this is really something we need to get across the finish line. And I realize Chris is, we're depending on his expertise, and he's very busy at this time of year, but we really should, as far as I know, nothing has been done in since maybe May.
Yeah, I think we'll start a big push in November, okay? Because that's when everybody's, when the natural world is folding up for the year, for the season. So let's go for November. All right, zero waste. John, Lisa?
Sure, I can get that started. So a couple of weeks ago, I think several of you joined us for the A2 collaborators meeting where we gave an overview and kind of shared some thoughts and got some really good feedback from folks. We also launched our first video in telling the stories of circularity. That now is on the Circular Economy website for the city, and along with an enhanced map that we continue to work with. We finally got the $10,000 Micros grant that we applied for over a year ago to advance some of our work. We still kind of charged ahead with things, so we're hoping we can kind of shift that to focus that on some very specific stakeholder engagement work we'd like to do, particularly with the BIPOC community, thinking about engagement around circularity, defining it, opportunities, business development opportunities. So we're hoping we might be able to use some of that. Plus, we're also working, primarily city staff is working on another grant proposal to the USDN, the Sustainability Directors Network, to kind of advance that work too. I think what else? Oh, and then in about 6 weeks, we'll be presenting our work for the state support we've been given through I2P3, kind of talking with them almost a little bit like a competition. We're going to be presenting against the other teams who have been involved in this. There will be a judging panel. So Lisa's been drafting that up, and then we're going to turn that over to some folks at the city to kind of put final touches on that. I think that's all I had. Lisa, anything else you wanted to note?
Well, I think the only thing you could add is the work with the SEAS team and how that's doing. Yeah.
So we've also had a team from U of M, from School for Environment and Sustainability, working with us. Been focused on a lot of things over the summer around community engagement and some of the videos and the map and the whole thing. And then we're meeting with them tomorrow to kind of map out where we want to go with them for this academic year, because we have them through April of 2023. So we're thinking about how to best position their efforts in light of where we're at with things. Like one of the things we hoped we do with them was create a map, but the map was already created and it's already very popular and going gangbusters. So we need to shift some of our work with them to current priorities. I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks, John and Lisa. Next up, pollinators. Yeah. You're muted.
Thank you. We have just come through our first newsletter that Bridget wrote. Thank you very much. And sent that out to the community of people who participated in NOMO May. We've been talking about what our next steps will be and actually preparing some communications for fall that will support the pollinators for next year instead of sending them off to compost, working on leaving the leaves. So that's a project that is kind of just starting. And that's mostly it, I think. Although I would say that what came to mind as we were just now discussing is that some of the things that we're working on, including encouraging people to reduce their turf grass and increase their gardened space with native plants, could assist with some of the stormwater things that we talked about. And Bridget, I don't know if you want to add something to this.
I guess the only thing I'll add is I had the same thought, Rita, that there is a little crossover, even with the we're having conversations about using fewer pesticides and fertilizers, so that outreach that might happen as we get more data and information about water quality could kind of work through this group as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Next up is water quality, but we've discussed that quite a bit. So does anybody want to add anything to that? Sarah, Rita? Okay. So planning, next up is other commissions. Planning Commission, update?
I would say we're moving on to our next TC1 zone on Stadium. And we passed that on to City Council. I personally would like to see a few other tweaks to it as it continues to evolve. But that was a big effort. And let's see, I'm trying to think, there was one other thing that we had here. Oh, I know. We had a PUD come through on 721 Forest, and something that occurred to me while I was commenting on that, which it's a site that has zero environmental resources on it. It's totally paved, and they're taking down a building and putting up another one. But they're right next to one of the only oak groves that are still within the city. And one of the things I brought up with them was the issue of oak wilt, which I don't know if you all know about, but is a really big issue that's starting to happen throughout the state. And it's affected a couple of projects that I've worked on, and a new ordinance, which might be actually helpful, which I know some other communities around Detroit have done, where they actually have an oak wilt ordinance that limits when you can take down oaks. It's pretty simple and straightforward, so that might be something to put on our agenda, just to be able to have some. And it's not super strict, but it brings awareness, and it's something you can kind of hand to a contractor or hand to a developer to say, oh, you really actually have to plan around this. So it's just a tragedy to see what's happening in other areas with oaks. So, and they're such an important organism for so many other organisms, pollinators included. So that's something that struck me as I was bringing that up, is that might be a kind of a crossover thing with the Environmental Commission to think about.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shannon. Energy Committee?
A few things. We did not meet this month, but next month we have a meeting on the 13th of September. And as a sort of a pre-meeting for that, Shannon and I and Brett and Missy are meeting on the 30th to talk about where there might be overlaps between Energy Commission and Planning Commission related to the issues of construction, affordable housing, and sustainable construction, and what, if anything, we can do in that space. And at least tentatively, I've arranged for someone who is the president and CEO of an architecture and development firm that operates mostly in the Northeast, that does a lot of net zero affordable housing that is also passive house certified. And there is now a substantial amount of data that indicates that good design practices combined with a collaborative approach, you can actually build a highly sustainable multi-family affordable housing for the same or lower cost than for traditional construction. And he's agreed to make a presentation at our meeting on the 13th, with the possibility that Brett might attend that meeting, and possibly even that there's at least a partial joint meeting on that day. And that's what we'll talk about on the 30th. But I think that might be a topic of widespread interest in the community.
Thanks, John. Ann's not here today, so we won't get a report from the Parks and Advisory. So we'll move on to council. Lisa, any reports on council activity?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything of particular interest to the Environmental Commission. I don't think so. I was assuming Kathy would be here, so I wasn't even thinking about that. If you want to move on to somebody else, I'll look and see if there's anything in my notes.
Okay, so then there's the chair report. I have a few things I want to mention. The first thing is that we're going to have the second annual Trash Talk Tour on September 18th. So the entire day of September 18th is going to be devoted to a Trash Talk Tour. I will personally be leading a bike tour to visit a lot of these sites, but they're pretty open. There's going to be a meetup and Eventbrite sites for logging in to visit at various sites. You know, they're going to include. So far, we're going to start at the bike tour is going to start at Common Cycle, you know, and downtown. We're going to go to Viridian and then down to the to the complex down there, the MRF, We Care, the landfill, the drop-off center, and then come back up through and go by the pound on South Industrial, and then there's going to be an afternoon ride out to Bring Your Own Container downtown, Eber White Elementary, and then a long leg out west to where the Kiwanis reuse center is. And so there are going to be a couple of booths there that we can talk about later, but it's going to be before the next commission meeting. So it's on September 18th. So look, Google it, look at the website. There'll be a website that will be up that you can Google Ann Arbor Trash Talk Tour and find most of the information before then. So all these sites will be manned outside of the bike tour. They're going to be manned by people, and so people can go visit there anytime during the day and check on what's going on at these different sites.
Hey, Steve, you should mention that to participate in the tours or the tour of the MRF, you have to sign up and register on the website. So you just can't show up at the MRF or show up for the bike tours. Yeah, that's correct. The bike tour, I want to restrict that to 25 people. So there's a sign up for that, but also the MRF, they need to predict and control the number of people that will show up there at any time. So the bike tour has the MRF from like 12:15 to 12:30. But other than that, there'll be slots, and there's an Eventbrite, I think, thing that was set up by Live Zero Waste, by Sam McMullen of Live Zero Waste, and there's also a meetup that Dan Ezekiel and myself and Sam are working on for signing up to join the bike tour. So you can join either the morning or the afternoon tour. And then in the morning, outside of the bike tour, there's an event at the University of Michigan Stadium where we'll get to see people cleaning up after a football game. It's quite an operation, and it's all volunteer, and there's entertainment and food. So if you want to show up at the Michigan Stadium, something like, I think it's like 8 o'clock in the morning, it'll be a fun event. It's not officially on the Trash Talk Tour. It's not on the bicycle tour, but I think that's available for the public to show up as well. And then the other thing is, I think in October there's going to be another fall, like an 820 fair, like an outdoor fair on Main Street. I think it's in October, but I'm not sure exactly what the date is and whether we want to have a table there. Chris Vanderbroek and Lunia and myself, manned a table last year, and it was in late September, early October. It was the Main Street Fair. It used to be called the Mayor's Green Fair, but now 820 is running it, and it's got a different name to it, but it's basically the same thing.
It's Friday, October 7th.
Okay.
And it's called the Autumn Green Fair, 6 to 9 p.m.
So I'm going to look into getting a table there. For the Environmental Commission, so let's see what, because we had quite a few people show up last time. And it's a great, it's a great event for the commission to participate in. I'll send out an email about asking for volunteers to the table once I've talked to the organizer, okay? And then the last thing is that, Chris Vanden Broek has resigned from the commission, so we're looking for another regular member. So I'd encourage people to apply to be on the commission, and we'll be going through the applications in the next week and trying to get somebody else on the commission, trying to get Chris's replacement on the commission by September, by our September meeting. Okay? That's all I have to say. So the next item on the agenda is staff, report from staff. Galen?
Yes, I just wanted to let everybody know that the fourth cohort of our A20 ambassadors will be starting on November 2nd. And then also I wanted to open up the opportunity, Brian Weiner from Recycle Ann Arbor isn't participating this year. So we have Jenny Potowski, Hannah Loftus, and there's another open slot. And I wanted to, open that up to maybe someone from Zero Waste or Circular Economy to teach that session, the 2-hour session with Jenny and Hannah Loftus. This year, we're asking folks, for those instructors that we do choose, we're asking them to record their presentations so that the participants can look at it the week ahead. So when they come in, it's not they're absorbing information. It's more of like a give and take, more feedback, and more action-oriented items. So if you're interested, I can send you the syllabus that we've used, but it's going to change a bit, because we're, pushing the circular economy and whatnot. So, and that's all. And then one last thing, next month will be my last meeting. I'm moving on to the Michigan Environmental Council. So, October 23rd to be my last day with the city. So.
Well, Galen, it's been fun having you with us. So, best wishes, and we're gonna have a party or something.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll let everybody know when it's going to be.
Okay.
Congratulations and boo-hoo.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Galen. Anything else from staff?
No, nothing.
Okay. So items for next agenda. Does anybody want to suggest an item for discussion at the next agenda, at our next meeting? Okay, well, I'll develop the agenda in the next week or two, or Rita and Galen and I will.
There were a couple of suggestions we talked about, so you can consider those. Those may be too short a notice, but at least something to consider.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we haven't talked about solid waste, so it would be good to have something on solid waste, on circular economy, zero waste, sometime this fall, like October. And so okay, and all right, so let me know, email me and Rita and Galen if you have any suggestions for topics for our next meeting within the week. And so the next scheduled meeting is going to be October. Is anybody going to hit their calendar first? Get to their calendar first? I didn't write this down. It's going to be October. September 22nd. September 22nd. Okay, at 7 p.m. So the next item on our agenda is public commentary. So this is the second opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 915-8343-9176. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments and be patient. There may be a delay of up to 30 seconds before a connection is established. But Galen, is there anybody on the line right now?
There's no one on the line.
Okay. Well, let's wait 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, is there anybody on the line yet?
There's no one on the line.
Okay, well, thanks, Galen. So this ends the public commentary period. So I adjourn this meeting at 9:10 p.m. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, bye for now.
I